You're listening to The Dead Prussian, a podcast about war and warfare.
We've talked about ethics on this show before, and we've talked a little bit about warrior cultures, but not so much. We've talked about veterans, we've talked about soldiers, we've talked about the modern veterans' issues, but we haven't really talked about their codes, their values, what makes them behave the way they do when they're fighting the wars we've discussed. Luckily, I've got an idea on how to find that out. G'day listeners and welcome back to the Dead Prussian podcast. It's Mick here, your host, of course your humblest host of a show named after a 19th century Russian military theorist. Now, thank you for all the reviews on iTunes. Thank you for all the support through the bookshelf. That's right, if you go to www.thedeadprussian.com/bookshelf, you can grab some books from Book Depository, free global shipping, and it supports the show. We've also had the launch of our Patreon page, and I thank everyone who's shown support so far, and that's at www.patreon.com/thedeadprussian. It's a membership program where you can jump on and look at the options and join our community. Now, let's get to codes, warriors, and values. My guest today is Dr Shannon E French, and she is the Inamori Professor in Ethics, the Director of the Inamori International Center for Ethics and Excellence, and a tenured member of the Philosophy Department with a secondary appointment in the law school at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. And for those non-American listeners out there, that is where the Drew Carey show was set. She is also a senior associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS. Everyone knows them. They've got a great Twitter account in Washington, D.C. Dr. French received her PhD in philosophy from Brown University in 1997. Prior to starting at CWRU in 2008, she taught for 11 years as an associate professor of philosophy at the United States Naval Academy and served as associate chair of the Department of Leadership, Ethics and Law. She's the author of many scholarly publications, including The Code of the Warrior, Exploring Warrior Values, Past and Present. She's also the editor-in-chief for the International Journal of Ethical Leadership and associate editor for the Journal of Military Ethics. So you can guess, listeners, it's taken quite a bit of effort to try and squeeze the Dead Prussian into Shannon's very busy schedule. Shannon, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Shannon, before we jump straight into warrior cultures and values and codes, I'm interested to learn a little bit more about yourself and how you became interested in studying ethics as an academic.
Well, one part of that answer is a little bit boring and obvious, and that is that my father is a philosopher. Not only is he a philosopher, he's also an ethicist. Not only is he also an ethicist, he also directed an ethics center. So there's a certain amount of apple tree happening there. That explains a lot. But it's actually slightly funny that I tried to resist it. I initially wasn't even going to take philosophy classes in college, but I got sucked in. And even once I admitted that I loved philosophy, I said, but I can't do ethics because that's what my dad does. So I tried to do metaphysics for a while, and that failed also, and I got sucked into the ethics questions. When I was a graduate student, I particularly became fascinated by the question of what happens when self-interest and ethics conflict. And if you think about that question, you can perhaps start to see why I ended up in military ethics as my specialty.
Yeah, it's interesting, self-interest and ethics. It's usually for me, it's when the last chocolate in the house is up for grabs and it's me or my kids. I won't tell the listeners how it ends because they might start thinking of me as a bad person. Now, your most recent book's called The Code of the Warrior. Are you able to give the listeners a brief once-over lightly on what the book is about? Don't ruin the book, though, because we need them to buy it.
Well, yeah, I won't spoil the ending for you. How's that? Well, what what the book does is initially I look at the basic question of why warriors would ever want to have a code that restricts what they can do. Because, of course, on the face of it, that's kind of crazy. Why would you want to fight with one hand tied behind your back? Why would there be any restrictions on what is honorable or dishonorable? And I try to answer that question. And then I go sort of through this tour of different warrior cultures throughout history and in different parts of the globe. Obviously not exhaustive. There are so many I could have chosen. But I end up looking at ancient Greeks, Romans, Vikings, Celts, Native Americans, knights in chivalry, Japanese samurai, Chinese warrior monks, Islamic warriors, and then I return back to the present and talk about how all of this is still relevant, even in the era of cyber conflict and drones and warrior robots.
Wow, sounds like you had a few cultures to choose from and you chose them all. Um, but
Well, no, I'm still angry with myself because there were several that I wanted to include but didn't, including Zulu and several others, but time got the better of me.
well, there's always a call for good sequels out there, and if they ever turn it into a movie, maybe there's a follow on.
There you go.
Now, during the research for this book, and I suppose in your wider academic endeavours over the past few years, have you found any trends or commonalities across these warrior cultures?
Absolutely. And probably the most important one, which was a revelation for me and extremely helpful broadly in my work in military ethics, is the fact that what drove these codes time and time again was not anyone from the outside saying, oh God, these scary warriors, we must contain them. Nor was it primarily, frankly, concern about innocent people who could be killed by these warriors.
Yeah.
The driving force was actually concern about the welfare of the warriors themselves. And that's important for a number of reasons, including many of today's struggles are, of course, very asymmetric. That's not new. That's happened throughout history, but we certainly see a lot of it now. And there's a lot of times where it is reasonable for someone to say, why would the more powerful side exercise restraint when they can simply wipe out their enemy quite easily? But the answers come back through history to do with what war does to the people who fight in it. Yeah. And if you approach it as total war with no limits, without at least saying, hey guys, I have an idea, let's not put babies on spikes. If you don't at least draw some kind of lines and say this far but no further, the warriors themselves find a loss of identity. They find a sense of, now hang on, how am I different again from just a murderer? How am I something else? And how do I justify what I'm doing to myself, to my family, if there's a faith tradition involved, to the divinity? How do I reconcile what I do if you take away from me the sense that there are some things I do and some things I will never do?
It's interesting. I was just thinking there's actually no jokes you can make about putting babies on spikes. So I'll probably leave the obligatory smart aleck comment from myself, and I'll just move on to the next question. Was there any warrior culture in particular, and you studied quite a few for the book, was there any warrior culture in particular that really intrigued you?
Well, there were definitely a lot of things I learned and that surprised me. I think the two that I would probably mention, one is that the Native American tribes that I studied, and even there too, I only looked at a very small sample because there are hundreds of tribes, but the ones that I looked at seem to have a much better grip than we have in modern times on the necessity of actually orchestrating some kind of transition process for people who've experienced war, and not doing it in some, again, imposed from the outside, inauthentic way that warriors would just roll their eyes at, but having various rituals that appeal directly to the nature of the people doing the fighting, but acknowledge that this kind of experience doesn't make you immediately able to just slip back into the tribe with no effects unless you go through some kind of transition process. So that was one that really jumped out at me, and I thought, boy, we need to remember what we've forgotten about this. And I think the other one that surprised me and impressed me was in studying the Chinese warrior monks for that chapter, the Shaolin monks. I was fascinated by the fact that the core of their code is all about essentially peace and nonviolence. And yet they're unbelievably hard on themselves with their training and their rites of passage, what you have to go through to make it to their culture and make it through and be accepted as a warrior. Unbelievably rigorous. They are, to put it bluntly, very badass. And yet they're committed to not using those skills unless absolutely necessary, and only using them to the minimum degree to stop the problem. So they consider it a failure or something that they need to work harder on if they actually have to beat someone.
I didn't know this interview was going to go towards Shaolin Monks. Otherwise, I would have got a completely different joke book out. But I just love the touring shows they do. But they are extremely impressive individuals. The idea of returning to one society after going through, I suppose these days they often call it decompression, is quite fascinating. To allow warriors or soldiers to reintegrate into society. So my next question, which kind of ties in with what we try and do on this show and discuss war and warfare and its impact and importance to society, is why is it important to study warrior cultures and their value systems? I mean, what can it teach us about war and its role in society?
Well, I think one of the important things, and again, this is speaking to the people who have to fight today, is to help them recognize that they're not the first people to go through this.
Yeah.
I think when we lose sight of history, one of the many critical losses is this sense that there are certain experiences that are timeless, that just have to do with human nature. And I found with all the work I've done, I've been privileged to work not only at the Naval Academy in Annapolis, but I have worked with the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Air Force, the Army. In fact, right now I'm actually serving as the General Hugh Shelton Distinguished Chair in Ethics for the U.S. Army Command and Staff General College. So in working with all of these folks in today's U.S. military, and I've worked with some foreign militaries as well, I find that it is very helpful to them to talk about the fact that every emotion that they feel and endure, even things like boredom, are not new to the warrior experience. And the things that might worry them a little, like what if I feel exhilaration after a fight? Does that mean I'm a monster? What if I feel nothing? What does that mean? What if I am tortured by certain experiences and others not? What does all of this mean as I'm trying to process it? Having that tie to the past and recognizing that, wow, I didn't come on this earth and the first person ever asked that question. And people have wrestled with this is extremely helpful. And it even comes into play in making actual decisions in the moment, because you can look back and say, here's someone who threw restraint out the window for whatever pressures of expediency. And here is what they suffered. Here is what the consequences of that were. You don't have to jump off the same cliff. Someone did that. You can look at that and learn from that. And also, if you have made mistakes, you can see how people found paths of redemption in the past, so that, again, you don't feel like there's just no path for me to follow.
And I'm going to throw in an unplanned question here, because I like to do that to my guests sometimes. But following on from that, did you find that during your study, the importance of the code and the culture to the individual, it gelled, I suppose, nicely with the way society, the society of that warrior, viewed that warrior? Was the society's viewpoint of that warrior based on understanding the code of that warrior as well?
Well, it is. And not only is that true, but actually where it isn't, and an example I can give from my country is the way that the folks returning from the Vietnam War were treated, where there is disconnect, where people don't see their warriors as warriors, but do call them names, baby killers and murderers and all that, and they don't see what they've done as honorable. It's incredibly damaging. I mean, if you look at the Vietnam conflict, so much of what is emphasized in even the collective memory, and I know people are trying to work on this still, but are the times when things did go horribly wrong, like the My Lai massacre and things like that. And obviously those things happened, and it's very important that we study them and understand why they happened and why they should never happen. But many, many people served honorably in that conflict, and yet were treated as though they had no code when they returned. They were treated as though they were barbarians, and that they had disgraced themselves, disgraced their country, and so forth. And that disconnect of not knowing the code is just so permanently damaging. We have people, still today, decades later, feeling the pain of that.
It's a very good example of war's damaging impacts on society in a way that's probably not expected. The Vietnam War, because it wasn't just the vets that suffered at the end, it's also the societies. I know in Australia we had a very similar legacy, but the societies themselves also suffered by not understanding it and went through a healing process themselves.
Well, and I believe that when society lowers its standards and changes the rules of war too dramatically, not only does that hurt the warriors, but I agree, it damages the national character as well. And it's hard to dig back out of that. So in a sense, it doesn't, long term, it's not a good strategy. Oh, goodness, I used the word strategy in.
Excellent.
I have to say, my husband is actually a strategic theorist, a very big fan of Dead Prussian.
Oh, excellent.
So, yes, but it puts a certain pressure on me not to, screw that up.
It's that's all right. We won't tell him, but he will listen to the show because, as you said, he's a big fan, like all good strategic theorists should be. Now, Shannon, I'll stop. I'll stop talking about your husband, and I'll start talking about the final question, which is the bill, the price tag. Each guest gets to pay for the pleasure of my company, and it relates to our mission on the show. And the mission is, as discussed previously, to define war in as many ways possible, like Big Carl, the dead Prussian himself, and also to understand war's impact on society and the role it plays in society. So I ask each guest to finish a sentence, and that sentence is war is. So, Shannon, I ask you to finish the sentence, war is.
Sometimes necessary, but always an evil.
That's very good. It's very, very sharp. Sometimes it's hard to get people to keep their answers short and sharp. Previous guests, I hope you're listening to this. Although I'm not so sure everyone listens after they've been on the show. I think they just listen to get themselves on the show, and then after that they turn off. But you won't be. You'll be a big fan straight after this. So.
I am a big fan.
Shannon, that's actually a very good definition. That's not just tweetable, and now Twitter's gone out to 280 characters. I don't really have to worry about whether or not a definition is tweetable because apart from a few guests, we usually get them down. But the idea of its necessity, but also the harmful impacts war has in relation to society is something that we've definitely been trying to get across on the show. Thank you very much for coming on the show, Shannon.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And listeners, remember, you can get The Code of the Warrior. It's Shannon's book on warrior cultures and their codes and ethics and values. You can purchase it through the show notes on your podcast player. We've put in a link. You can also jump onto the website, the Dead Prussian at Libsyn. If you go to our episode page, you'll be able to find it there. Also, just go to the book depository link through our bookshelf, and you'll be able to just type in The Code of the Warrior at the search bar and find it pretty easily. And remember, with Book Depository, it's free global shipping. Shannon also has a Twitter handle, and like all good guests, I recommend you follow Shannon on at SE French. If you follow Shannon on Twitter, make sure you let her know what you thought of tonight's interview. It's tonight here, it's today in the US, but we'll go with Australian time. Now, thanks very much for the support on Patreon. As I said at the start of the show, listeners, it is patreon.com/thedeadprussian. If you pick one of the Legends memberships, you can get access to a variety of member benefits. Some of this is the forum, and in the forum we have a section called Ethics, and we will be discussing this episode and Codes of Warriors throughout the next month. So please jump on, show a little bit of support to the community, join our community, be part of the discussion. But until next time, listeners, grab a book and crack on.
Join the conversation with us on Twitter at Dead Prussian Pod, on Facebook at the Dead Prussian page, or on our website www.thedeadprussian.com. All show notes for this episode, as well as copyright information, can be found on the website. The Dead Prussian podcast is written, produced and hosted by Mick Cook. It is co-produced by Amanda Levito. The music used throughout is Caught in the Beat by Broke for Free and is used under a Creative Commons Attribution license. All opinions expressed by individuals on the podcast are those of the individual and not necessarily representative of any other organisation.